Geraldine Page found out that her husband was having an affair in the meanest way possible. Rip Torn cheated on his wife with more than one woman. He brought his mistress into the theater group. Page had to work with the woman whose marriage was falling apart. Page had to watch them with them every night. During one practice, something happened that no one would ever forget, and that was the breaking point. After that, Page wouldn't let herself be torn again. The truth about why she made her choice is terrible. Geraldine Sue Page was born in Kirkville, Missouri, on November 22, 1924. Kirkville is a small college town with little money, but every room was filled with books and medicine. A man named Leon Elwyn Page was her dad. He worked at the Andrew Taylor Still College of Osteopathy and Surgery. In the years between 1925 and 1932, he wrote books like Practical Anatomy, Osteopathic Fundamentals, and The Old Doctor Late into the Night. Edna Pearl Page, her mother, ran the household. From the start, Geraldine grew up in a place where school was more important than fun. Younger brother Donald and she quickly learned that hard work, not luck, would help them get ahead. The family moved hundreds of miles to Chicago when she turned 5 years old. At the same time that they moved to Englewood, the Great Depression was getting worse in American cities. For a child who had only lived in a quiet college town, the change was huge. She now had to deal with noisy streets, a lot of people, and the rough edges of working families. She was raised in Methodism by her mother, so church life became like a second home for her. There were youth groups, Sunday services, and social events for her almost every week. This mix of strict religion inside and the tough city life outside showed her the difference between how people seem to be struggling and how they really are. In later work, that contrast helped her play characters whose calm faces hid storms. She soon took the stage at a small church, which would change her life. She joined the drama group at the Englewood Methodist Church when she was still a preteen. From the outside, it looked like just a few kids practicing in the basement. But it felt like a doorway to her. She started playing parts like Excuse My Dust and Joe March in Little Women when she was 17 years old, around 1941. For a shy girl, these parts were not small. The stories that everyone in the community loved were hard for her to carry. She learned that the stage could hold women who were unhappy, hurt, or brave in quiet ways the more she performed. She didn't forget how she felt. She dreamed of being a concert pianist when she was a young teen, but her family couldn't afford the expensive lessons. That dream slowly went away. She instead went to the public library and read plays on and off for weeks. She read about Lucille Laverne, Maude Adams, and Eva Le Gallienne in biographies. At Englewood High School, Page would sit with a stack of books on her desk and compare her simple life to the exciting ones she read about. She wasn't a name in the school. She was a serious, bookish teen who kept making her own world that was bigger than Chicago. When she graduated from high school in 1942, she went straight to the Art Institute of Chicago's Goodman School of Drama. It took her 3 years to finish the program, while most of her classmates were leaving for war or factory work. She threw herself into almost every role she could get at Goodman. She even got paid to act with a group of kids in theater. By 1945, when she was only 21, she had already played dozens of roles for her classmates, directors, and groups of excited school kids. That year, she quit the program and helped start a summer stock company in Lake Zurich. She then went to New York to study with Uta Hagen. The training made her more honest on an emotional and physical level, which made her famous for it. The years she spent with Goodman, from 1942 to 1945, shaped the rest of her life. She did it anywhere someone would let her. Church plays like Excuse My Dust, student productions, and plays for kids kept her on the move all the time. This hard work paid off when she got her big break in 1954, when she played Marceline in The Immoralist with James Dean and Louis Jordan, in a run of about 96 performances. In the end, it was called a sudden success. However, those years of hard work told a different story. There was no more fame for her after Goodman ended. Around 1945, she started working as a hard Midwest summer stock model and did it for about 5 years. It all began in Lake Zurich, and she worked for regional companies in places like Woodstock, New York. They put on new plays every week or two, so depending on the schedule, she went from being a laughing teenager to a stooped grandmother. 10 shows could happen in one season. She almost never left rehearsal. She learned to be strong, quick, and emotionally adaptable because of all the changes. These were the things that helped her do well in Tennessee Williams' Summer and Smoke in 1952. In 1950, she was about 26 years old and ready to take a chance. She quit a steady job in the area and moved to New York by herself. $1 a week was all she had to pay for a small room in Greenwich Village. The holidays went by while I worked 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. She worked in sales, at events, and even in the factory. Whenever she could, she got cheap theater tickets to see how Broadway stars could keep people interested for over 2 hours. Her big break on Broadway didn't come until after her first show off-Broadway in 1948, in Seven Mirrors. She starred in Midsummer in January 1953. It ran for 109 performances and showed that she could carry a commercial play even after years of barely making it. The real spark happened in 1952 in Circle in the Square, an experimental theater that was made from a club. Everything changed in that little room. Theodore Mann and Jose Quintero were the ones who first cast her in Yerma. Then Quintero put his faith in her with Alma in Summer and Smoke. It felt like every breath was bigger because the stage was so close to the seats. Some people said that the show helped start the off-Broadway movement. The first time the award went to a performer from outside of Broadway, it was given to her for this. At one point, she worked hard as an actress in summer stock. The next, she was one of New York's most talked about artists. Things got even worse in the beginning of 1954. In The Immoralist, she worked with James Dean and Louis Jordan. The director was fired because rehearsals were a mess. Dean fought with other people. At one point, the producer asked that he be taken out. Page stepped in to help him and keep him safe. What she told Dean was more than just on stage. In the end, her daughter told everyone that Page and Dean had an affair that went on for 3.5 months. Page said that he were artistic twins. He died in an accident in September 1955, and she kept his pictures and drawings taped to her mirrors for years afterward. Friends said that she kept thinking about him in private for a long time after the rest of the world had moved on. She did well in her early movies, but it cost her something. Page was looked down upon in Hollywood during the McCarthy era just for studying under Uta Hagen, who had left-leaning views. Studios put her name on unofficial lists of people to avoid. Not since Hondo in 1953 had she been in a Hollywood movie. It had been almost 10 years. She went back to New York instead and worked anywhere that valued serious craft. Radio, TV, and the stage. It was a big difference. Most people became famous after getting one Oscar nomination. It made her quiet, which she hadn't earned. It was first shown at the Royal Theatre on February 8, 1954. The story took place around 1900 in Normandy and North Africa and was about a married scholar who was trying to figure out who he was. At the time, it was brave, but behind the scenes, it was unstable. The first director was fired. Dean kept getting into fights with co-workers. The producer almost switched him out, but Page stopped them. The show was put on about 100 times. Even though it wasn't a big hit, it was an important part of both her and Dean's stories because of what happened behind the scenes. Away from work, her life changed when she married violinist Alexander Schneider in 1954. Of the string quartet from Budapest. He was older by more than 10 years and had a strong background in classical music. They were married until 1957. Her work on stage kept getting better while his life was full of concerts and tours. Their schedules didn't always match up. By the early 1960s, she was married again, this time to actor Rip Torn, and she was back in the world she had worked so hard to get to. When Geraldine Page played Alma Weinmiller on Broadway in Summer and Smoke in 1957, something that will never be forgotten happened. She let herself open up every night. Her voice broke. Her hands were shaking. It looked like her whole body curled up and then slowly stretched towards something she could almost touch. At the end of her scene, everyone was so quiet that critics wrote about it. There were times when it went on for a few seconds before anyone remembered to clap. At a time when Broadway was still influenced by Hollywood glamour, that performance got her a Tony nomination. In the end, Tennessee Williams told James Grissom that Geraldine had a mind that he could beat anyone in the world. And after that, she became the kind of honest, hurt heroine he wanted in his plays. In 1959, only 2 years after that, she went back to Broadway to play Princess Alexandra del Lago in Sweet Bird of Youth. She was an old movie star who was losing her cool and holding on to a young gigolo played by Paul Newman. She fell back and forth between big poses and pure fear on stage. She drank, choked, and passed out. And grabbed Newman as if she were going to leave him without him. In the late 1950s, this was shockingly open for a live theater show. The character's fear of time felt even stronger because she let herself look like she was in bad shape. Williams admired how her work never wasted a moment and how every little thing she did was important to the bigger picture. He relied on actresses like her to show the parts of himself he didn't want to say out loud. Then 1963 came along. Eugene O'Neill's Strange Interlude came back in a big way, and Page took on the huge role of Nina Leeds. It went on for over 4 hours. In fact, it needed a break in the middle, just like the first 5-hour run on Broadway in 1928. Page had to tell a story that took place over many years. Going from young grief to heavy resignation. Time magazine said that Nina's life was a series of few joys and daily atonement. Page was right in the middle of all that weight. Her performance, which lasted almost 3 hours, held the whole show together. A Christmas Memory on ABC Stage 67 in 1966, a few years later, showed a kinder side of her. The story was told by Truman Capote himself, and Page played his kind cousin Sook with soft movements and a soft, breathy voice. She cared about every little thing she did as she and the boy gathered things to bake Christmas fruitcakes. The show won an Emmy, and both the teleplay and Page won Peabody Awards. People still say it was one of the most moving holiday dramas ever. At the same time, another path appeared. Her movie Hondo got her a nomination for an Oscar in 1953, but Hollywood wouldn't let her work there for almost 8 years because of a blacklist. And by 1972, she had been nominated for 4 Oscars. Pete and Tilly gave her a 5th. She played Gertrude, a friend who got in the way and whose sharp humor hid moments of truth. It was great that she could go from dry humor to piercing honesty so quickly. You could win 2 Academy Awards for this movie, one for the screenplay and one for Page as Best Supporting Actress. Even though she lost to Eileen Heckert that year, the nomination showed that she could still take center stage in any role. Inside came out in 1978. Woody Allen wrote Eve for Ingrid Bergman at first, but when Bergman turned it down, Page took over the part. Eve was a scary, well-behaved interior decorator whose illness caused her family to fall apart. Since there wasn't much music in the movie, every little move her hands made and every flat tone in her voice carried the weight. She was nominated for another Oscar for Best Actress, and the movie got 5 nominations in total. But no wins. The loss made her more well-known as one of the most nominated actors in Academy history who had never won. This was her reputation until she finally won in 1986. An American named Rip Torn, who was 24 years old at the time, walked into a speech class at the Actors Studio in 1955. He was Brick's understudy in the first run of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof on Broadway. He was new to New York and still had some rough spots. When he met Geraldine Page, who was 30 years old. She had been divorced twice, been nominated for an Oscar, and been known for having sharp blue eyes that could see right through people. The first time they flirted, it was weird and almost childish. He asked to taste her ice cream. When she laughed, a gap appeared between them. Soon, their classmates noticed that they stayed after class. Scenes that went on past midnight in rooms that were usually empty by 10 p.m. Page's scripts from that time had 2 sets of handwriting scribbled in the margins, according to friends who spoke after the fact. This showed that they were working together before either of them had the courage to leave their marriages. Over the years, that bond became something that people all over the city talked about. Page and Torn played lovers who would never get together in Sweet Bird of Youth at the Martin Beck Theatre in March 1959. The show ran for almost a year and made them one of the hottest pairs on Broadway. Reviewers kept coming back to their sexy bedroom scenes, but they didn't know that behind the scenes, they were sneaking out of different doors to avoid the photographers who were looking for a scandal shot. For the record, she was still legally married to violinist Alexander Schneider. They got divorced in 1957 after getting married in 1954. The last bits of another life were still being held together by Torn. After that, the next 4 years were a mess and full of rumors. They did get married, though, on September 8, 1963, in quiet Pinnacle County, Arizona. She was 38 years old and he was 32. Friends said that they chose that low-key ceremony in the desert because back in New York, the tabloids were already talking about them. In 1964, they had a daughter named Angelica. In the middle of the 1960s, twin sons Anthony and Jonathan were born. 3 kids in about 3 years, while both careers were going very quickly. At about the same time, they moved into a brownstone at 435 West 22nd Street in Chelsea. It was a 4-story building from the 1800s that was used as a home, a place to practice, and then as its own small theater. Even the buzzer plate said, "Torn Page," which was a joke that became a little piece of New York history. Angelica would later say that the house was crazy and crowded, with babysitters, students, actors, and housekeepers coming and going, confusing maze of loyalties than a normal home. After the show on Broadway, MGM made a movie version of Sweet Bird of Youth, which came out in 1962. Page got back together with Paul Newman, and Torn got a major supporting role. Their tense relationship lived on in the movie for a much bigger audience. There was a strong sexual undercurrent in the movie, and Page's part as a falling star who is stuck on a younger man echoed the rumors that followed her off the stage. As news of her relationship with Torn spread, gossip writers connected how close they seemed on screen to the loud fights and quiet reconciliations that were talked about in rehearsal rooms. In the future, Page would say that Torn was just as creative as she was. She kept getting jobs where she would be working with him. But his friends saw that he was unstable, prone to sudden rage, and needed to be in charge of a room long before the public learned about his fights and scandals. By the end of the 1960s, their paths were going in different directions. Torn started to spend more time in Hollywood and got lead roles in movies like Don't Make Waves, that came out around 1967. Page chose to stay in New York. They were apart for long periods of time and then reconnected in intense ways. The public saw them as a powerful couple in the arts, but their private life was slowly falling apart. Some people knew about Torn's drinking, cheating, and at least one child he had with someone else while he was married. By 1969, it was so common for him to disappear from parties with other women that when the truth about his long affair with Amy Wright came out, Page's children said it only proved what they had been seeing for years, that things were crazy at home. Then 1976 came along. At age 45, Torn was putting on an off-Broadway production of Hamlet at the Sanctuary Theater. He was the prince. He was in charge of the show and worked in the same small rooms as Page. Amy Wright, who was 19 years younger and was cast as Ophelia, walked into that small group. Many late-night rehearsals led to the start of the triangle in shared dressing rooms and crowded rehearsal corners. Page, who was 52 at the time, saw the younger actress become an unavoidable part of her husband's daily work. That same year, the three of them built the Sanctuary Theater together. There was real drama going on, though, far from Page's script. Around the beginning of the 1980s, the link between Torn and Wright had gone too far. He and Page stopped living together, but they were still legally married. At the same time, Page's movie career started to take off again. She gave a fierce performance in the 1984 play Pope of Greenwich Village. That got her a 7th Oscar nomination when she was about 60 years old. People thought she was tough and funny, but she was really a wife who knew her husband was quietly starting a new family with a woman he met in 1976. She chose to keep working with his name still connected to her personal life, their accounts, and their past work together in the theater. It was known to everyone about the private triangle in 1983. Torn had a daughter with Amy Wright. They later named her Catherine. He and Page had been married since 1963. She had been married for 20 years, had 3 children, and ran a theater company with her husband. A lot of gossip columns picked up on the story. After the baby was born, a columnist asked Page about getting a divorce. Page calmly said that she and Rip were still married. and didn't understand why everyone was so excited. People in the news were shocked by her answer, which showed that she wanted to keep the marriage together and not act like the defensive wife. Things were getting stranger in their Chelsea home. Didn't move in plain sight. She lived away from Torn Page life with the child, but she stayed close. Inside the main apartment, Page had a different set of babysitters and housekeepers take care of Angelica and the twins. Angelica later talked about how, as a teen, she wasn't always sure who worked for her father and who might have something to do with him. In her later play, Turning Page, she talked about memories of a house full of adults coming and going. She said that someone she thought was a maid might have been the real thing, and the mood changed between funny stories and a constant fear that the family would fall apart. Even more work got done on stage by Page during all of this. She played the lead role in Agnes of God on Broadway in 1982 and 1983. It played for 599 times, and she was nominated for another Tony Award. Then, in late 1985, she went off Broadway to play a hurt matriarch in Sam Shepard's A Lie of the Mind, a long, emotionally brutal drama. Every night, she went from a life where her husband stayed with another woman to the stage, where she played disappointed people. Critics praised how honest she was. They had no idea how close her honesty was to her real grief. In 1977, Torn brought his wife and his younger lover to the same show. Page and Wright were led by him in The Stronger, a short play by August Strindberg that is mostly silent and tense. Wright later said that both women were already jealous when they came to rehearsals. Page saw her past and knew what her status was. Wright was young and had access to Torn. They looked at each other so intently across the small stage that they often left after shows without saying a word. Page and Torn were still married in the mid-1980s, but they were living separate lives. Wright lived nearby with Torn's family and their growing daughter. Page lived with her grown children and even a grandchild. Torn moved from house to house and said he was independent. In public, they still looked close enough to make people confused. But when they were alone, she talked to him like a coworker whose presence needed to be managed carefully. She finally got the Oscar she had been after for more than 30 years in 1985, when she played the part that would win her the award. In The Trip to Bountiful, Carrie Watts, an old woman stuck in a small Houston apartment, begged for one last trip to the town where she used to feel alive. In March 1986, Page won the Academy Award. At age 61, many people who knew her personal story thought that performance had more to it than meets the eye. They saw a woman suffocating in a house she didn't recognize. She was holding on to her inner world because it was the only place that wasn't changed. It seemed like those quiet breakdowns on screen were coded metaphors for her decision to stay married but emotionally separate. She kept getting asked about her marriage from 1983 to 1986. People in the columns wondered if she would finally leave Torn now that he had a child with someone else. She always stood her ground. She insisted that the marriage was still strong and wouldn't let Hollywood portray her as an old actress who was thrown out. After the fact, biographers said that she did this on purpose to protect her image in a field where women were already looked down upon after age 40. Then she made her last bow. She went back to Broadway with Blithe Spirit, which opened on March 31, 1987. She was nominated for another Tony at age 62 for her role as Madame Archetay, a strange and happy medium. Torn didn't have any creative input in that show, and their marriage was mostly just a paper thing at that point. On June 13, 1987, she didn't show up to either recital. Calls were not answered. The police went to her home in Chelsea and found her dead in bed. The coroner said it was a heart attack. The producer stood in front of the crowd that night and told them their star had died. Because it seemed so fake, some people thought it was part of the show. Since 1963, Page and Torn were legally married, and their marriage stayed together until the day she died. Torn kept living with Amy Wright and had 2 girls with her. But Page never let him get a divorce. Even more shadows were in her emotional life. In the 1950s, she loved James Dean very much. Page kept pictures of Dean stuck to her mirrors until the mid-1980s, according to her daughter. It sounds crazy for a famous actress to surround herself with pictures of a lost love while her husband was living with someone else. shows how unresolved her inner life was. Page won one Academy Award out of 8 she was nominated for before she died. In 31 years, she nominated people for everything from Hondo in 1953 to the Pope of Greenwich Village in 1984. They nominated her for 4 Tonys, 2 Emmys, 2 Golden Globes, and 1 BAFTA. In 1979, they put her in the American Theatre Hall of Fame. Some reviewers said she was one of the best stage actors of her time. Because she worked so hard at the craft, her family paid a price. For 3 years, Page and Torn raised their 3 kids during tours and rehearsals. Each night, the kids saw their parents change. Angelica later made a one-woman show about her mother's genius and the storms that changed their home. That was the most haunting part of Page's life in many ways. Her kids got her artistic skills, but they also got the emotional weight of growing up in a place where art was always more important than family.